Christmas is a time for serving one another with love. And what better way than to provide a nourishing meal? Love is the way to fight hunger, homelessness, and loneliness this holiday season. Visit scottmission.com to give now.
Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everybody and welcome to Paranormal Guys Inc. Radio, episode number 11. Today we have a very special guest, Nick Pope. And right now I want to bring in my co-host, Derek Frankham.
Hey everybody, how's it going today? It's a great day out there.
It sure is.
Getting pretty hot.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Finally, the spring weather has hit us. In fact, it's almost summer-like.
Oh, yeah.
I want everyone to take a look at all the links I posted on the chat room. It's all there. It's all the important stuff related to Paranormal Guys and Nick Pope's main website as well. And as usual, just want to give a nice hello and thank you to all our Facebook and to everyone at MySpace and Now Public. Thanks for your support. The articles that I wrote on Now Public, there's a whole whack of them, and visit our MySpace pages. Both Derek and I's profile links are there, and the YouTube page. You can even follow us on Twitter now if you like. I put that link as well. I'm going to soon apply that to the Facebook group as well. And I hope everyone is having a great day so far. We're just going to wait for Nick Pope to call in. For those that may not know who he is, he's a former employee for the Ministry of Defense from the UK, and he handled a lot of the UFO files that were sent to the British military and the Parliament, and would analyze the material and decide whether it was worth to investigate or not. So again, we're just going to wait for him to call in. I believe he's going to call in roughly around 12:05, and once he calls in, we'll get the show going. How's your day so far, Derek?
It's pretty good, just I was outside this morning kind of, keeping my tan up, starting to fade from the last Cuba trip. So, yeah, it doesn't take long for that to happen.
That's true. That's true, especially in the Canadian climate. We have such a short summer and an extended cold period.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And the weather hasn't been too great since I got back as well, so...
No, you're right. Rainy,
25
cold.
Celsius is a blessing right now.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, most definitely. But it's going to be interesting to hear from our guest here. Yeah.
Yeah,
a better person to talk to than someone that's actually worked for the government. So,
especially too, since he just finished off the X conference down in Washington D.C. with some extremely heavy hitters: Edgar Mitchell, Richard Dolan, Stephen Bassett, who we'll be talking to in the near future.
Yeah.
Milton Torres and Alfred Weber from exopolitics.org. So I'd like to ask him a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And
he did a really great job on that conference.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it was one of the year's best, I believe. You know, and hopefully it'll continue and open doors for other events and conferences that are similar to that.
Yeah, maybe more people will come forward that might know something.
That would be awesome, actually.
They're just dying to talk about it.
Des Moines Paranormal in our chat room said he used to work at Area 51 and would like to do a show in the near future. Okay, I believe we have Nick Pope on the line right here. I'm going to let him in.
Hi, it's Nick Pope here.
How are you, sir?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you very much for being on our show. It's an extreme pleasure and an honor to speak to you, sir.
Thank you.
How's your day so far?
Yes, just catching up with a few emails. I've just recently returned from the X conference in Washington, D.C. and the associated gathering at the National Press Club, so there's clearly still quite a little bit of business to discuss on issues that were raised there.
Yes, if you really would like to, we can get right into that. It's such a big event, and I seen the video courtesy of Stephen Bassett. It was extraordinary. So if you would like, please do start off by just giving us a little insight to that event.
Yes, well, this is the third X conference that I've actually attended, and of course it was it's always one of the main events in the conference calendar, as it were, in this subject of ours. And this was a particularly august gathering of individuals, and very much the star of the show, of course, was Sixth Man on the Moon, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, and he gave a very interesting presentation and indeed made a number of important remarks on the reality of this phenomenon at the National Press Club on Monday.
So by him being a proponent of the full disclosure, does that, in your mind, assist in the actual movement, or do we need more people like him?
Well, I think you would always hope that we're going to be more people, but clearly to have an all-American hero, an internationally respected figure, actually stepping up and speaking out on this issue is, of course, enormously helpful in having this subject taken seriously.
Right.
I think sometimes the media, the wider public, might think that those associated with the UFO issue are somewhat questionable in terms of their attitude, and all sorts of disparaging remarks have been made. But when you have somebody, an astronaut, somebody who's walked on the surface of the moon, I think it does a lot. And people say, well, hold on a moment, I thought all these people were supposed to be crackpots, and now we're looking at an increasing number of commercial airline pilots, people with backgrounds in the Federal Aviation, the FAA, people with all sorts of military backgrounds are speaking out, and astronauts as well. So clearly it helps the credibility of the subject. And of course, the other thing is that when an astronaut speaks on any issue at a press conference, the media are likely to come. And indeed, as you and listeners will doubtless have been aware, there was coverage in the Washington Post, on CNN, on a number of mainstream news sites.
Now, I wanted to ask you, is there people watching these events that don't want this to go forward? Because I know you've been on both sides of the coin, from the parliamentary politics side and also as a researcher now. Do you find that there's factions out there that want to keep this quiet?
Well, I suppose that question predisposes what, if anything, there is to keep quiet about. I mean, my own position on this, incidentally, is not, although I was happy to share a platform with the people at the conference, I am not somebody who's really associated with the disclosure movement or the exopolitics movement, because my own view is that whilst I think some UFO sightings are extremely interesting and genuinely unexplained, and whilst I'm convinced there are defence, national security and air safety issues, and that there's certainly a mystery to be studied, I'm not one of these people who is absolutely certain about what this is, and I don't know that the government is either. I sometimes suspect that far from knowing about this and covering it up, the government and the military might be as in the dark about this as anyone else. In a sense, if I'm right, that's an even more disturbing scenario.
Yes. Well, let me ask you too. Do you honestly believe in UFOs, or do you just consider the possibility of something there, but it's not really known? And did something change your mind to make you believe it a little more?
I think the way I would characterize my views is that I'm absolutely certain that there is a genuine mystery here. Clearly all these things can't be explained as misidentifications or hoaxes. That said, while I don't rule out the possibility of some exotic, possibly extraterrestrial explanation for this, I mean, in strictly logical terms, as long as there's a mystery, as long as we're dealing with unknowns, I suppose in strictness one can't rule out any option. So I don't rule it out, but neither do I think there's any hard evidence to support it. Or rather, whilst there might be some intriguing evidence, there's nothing that would cross the threshold and become proof. Nothing that I've seen, anyway. And bear in mind, though, for all the people, and I know there are many, who will be disagreeing with me on this point, I'm only speaking with any authority, of course, about the position in the United Kingdom. That's where I worked for the ministry for 21 years, and that's, of course, where I had my access. But as to the situation in other countries, and particularly the United States, I don't know.
Well, let me ask you, what was your initial reaction to receiving this post? Was it shock? Was it kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe this? You know, how did you feel when you were first handed this assignment?
Well, it was a mixture of shock and surprise, and I suppose a bit of interest too. Right. I'd seen when I joined the Ministry of Defence in 1985, one of the things that you spend a bit of time doing is leafing through the what was at the time called the Green Book, which was just the telephone directory, but it itself was a classified document, and it had brief descriptions of various jobs. So, of course, the career-minded people would flick through this and try and pick postings that they thought they would like to be run for. And like a lot of people, I noticed one particular section where it just said UFOs, and I was intrigued by that, and little did I know that I was actually going to end up in that position. So yes, I went in with, as I say, a mixture of really not knowing quite what to think. I certainly had no prior knowledge or interest in UFOs, or certainly no belief. But as I say, I suspected it would be an interesting job, and I was certainly correct in that assessment.
Well, how many of the cases would you say, in your experience, were truly out of this world? 2%, 5%, less than that?
Around about 5%. I received about 200 or 300 UFO reports each year, and yes, of those, I estimate 80% I could explain with a high degree of certainty as misidentifications of all the usual sorts of things: aircraft lights, meteors, satellites, etc. 15% of the cases, there was probably insufficient information to come to any firm assessment. of what was seen. And 5%, yes, genuinely unexplained.
I guess, would Rendlesham Forest be in that category for the 5%?
Rendlesham Forest, yes, most definitely. Now, of course, that case occurred in December 1980, so it was 5 years before I'd even joined the Ministry of Defence. So it wasn't a case that happened during my tour of duty. But most certainly, yes, it is still unexplained to this day. I initiated what police officers would call a cold case review of this incident. So I pulled the case file, had a look through, I tried to find out what we knew, what we thought we knew, what we might have missed. An intriguing case, and a case that still attracts interest from all around the world. Just last weekend, the Australian Channel 7 news magazine show Sunday Night did a feature on UFOs, which touched on the release of the MOD's UFO files, and it certainly touched on Rendlesham. Colonel Holt was interviewed, for example, the deputy base commander who was a witness himself to the UFO.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of scary, especially when they can violate, like, airspace, you know? Certain countries' defense airspace. Yeah, it's kind of scary.
Yes, and that's, of course, it's that reason that it is one of the reasons why I still, even though I've now left the Ministry of Defence, why I continue in my efforts to keep this issue in the public eye, to keep it in the media where I can, because I do think, yes, exactly, if something is routinely penetrating our air defences, particularly living in the post 9/11 world, we've got to be concerned about anything in our airspace. If there's something there and it's not ours, whose is it? What's it doing? I mean, is for example, setting aside completely issues of UFOs, but is there a terrorist angle to something? Is there an espionage angle? And that, of course, is why all governments and all air forces, all around the world, take the territorial integrity of their own airspace extremely seriously.
Well, let me ask you, what kind of weapon, in your guess, would you think would take to bring one of these down? Would it be something that's extremely exotic and not even available yet, or could standard, say, nuclear missiles bring one of these down with the speeds that they're, supposedly able to achieve?
Well, I'm not sure, and of course I don't necessarily condone that sort of action. I mean, obviously for reasons of classification, I can't get into a discussion about detailed rules of engagement, but certainly one would regard opening fire on a UFO as something which should be the option of last resort, and only if there's evidence of hostile intent. Now, of course, this is a very controversial area because, of course, I made some statements to this effect to the media earlier this year and was interviewed about it on some very major TV news shows, including America's Newsroom on Fox News. And, of course, I pointed out that this has happened before. Pilots have been given shoot-down orders. Parviz Jafari, who was a pilot in the Shah of Iran's Air Force, was ordered to open fire on a UFO in 1976. He closed on the object, but his air-to-air missile capability was somehow taken offline, or it certainly malfunctioned. In December of 1980, a Peruvian pilot called Comandante Huertas opened fire on a UFO with a machine cannon. He saw the rounds, as he put it, get absorbed by the UFO. He said he didn't miss, they didn't ricochet off, but they were absorbed. These two first-person testimonies, by the way, can be found on the Coalition for Freedom of Information's website. Parviz Jafari's and Comandante Huertas' first-person accounts of how they attempted to bring down a UFO. And of course, I've just, as we were discussing, returned from the the X conference in Washington, where I shared the platform with Milton Torres, a retired United States Air Force major who in 1957, when based in England, was ordered to shoot down a massive UFO that was being tracked on radar. He said this thing was the size of an aircraft carrier, and he was flying an F-86D Sabre, and that carries 24 rockets, and he was about to launch these rockets when this UFO, from a very, very slow speed, accelerated away to speeds which he estimated as being Mach 10. Well, he returned to the base. He was debriefed. He was told that the mission had been classified top secret, and he was told, if you speak about this, your wings will be taken away. So he kept the secret for 50 years. Extraordinary story. In all of this, I realized, of course, I haven't answered your initial question, but
you've been doing quite well here. I understand that there's protocols that you cannot cross, but
yeah.
I appreciate your forthcoming and honesty so far. You know, it's
yes.
So
and I mean, I don't think it would be hugely helpful to get into a detailed speculative discussion. I mean, we've got all sorts of sophisticated weapons, including some which obviously you won't hear about for a number of years, because
right.
the technology in these fields always runs 10 or 15 years ahead of what's publicly declared. But as I say, it's my fervent hope that we shouldn't have to be shooting at these things, whatever they are.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you, what's your belief on the actual reporting scenario, you know, especially with the infamous Greys and now the more reporting of reptilians? Is it something that you take into account as being real, or is it a possibility that it's just, you know, a new aspect to this whole UFO phenomenon?
Well, certainly, I guess, going back through history, there has been a long and rich tradition of humans claiming to interact with other entities. Now, of course, we use modern words now, like aliens and greys and reptilians. I suppose if we were having this discussion 100 years ago, we might talk about goblins and fairies and elves. If we were religious, we might be discussing angels or demons. Interestingly, these are all just labels
right.
that we put on things, words that we use to try and classify something that may defy classification. It is clear to me, I mean, I've had a look at this both at the Ministry of Defence and privately. I've probably met around 100 or so people who claim to have had these contact experiences. To the best of my knowledge, these people are not attention seekers. Out of the 100 or so that I've come across, only half a dozen, if that, want anything to do with the media. So as I say, we can eliminate the theory that they're attention seekers after their 15 minutes of fame. Neither, from the handful of scientific studies that have been done into this, does it appear that there's evidence of any psychopathology here. These people aren't mad. There was a very interesting experiment done actually by two people who are quite skeptical about this, Clancy and McNally. If I'm getting their names right, Susan Clancy, I think, and Richard McNally. But they asked a group of abductees to relay their experiences, and then they asked a control group of non-abductees to relay horrific experiences and intrusive experiences as if they had occurred.
Right.
What they found was that the abductees were displaying physiological reactions such as increased heart rate and perspiration when recalling and relating their experiences. This wasn't present in the control group. So McNally and Clancy, skeptical though they are about the idea that this is extraterrestrial, certainly said, well, these people seem to believe what they say. They genuinely think these experiences have happened.
Yeah, they've had trauma of some sort.
Yeah.
Yes, and some of these abductees, that's an interesting word. I mean, certainly some of these abductees do almost, when relating their story, seem to still be in the grips of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right. And
I guess if they found an alien implant in some of those, that might actually corroborate it might have happened. I don't know how many cases where someone's been supposedly abducted and they actually found an implant.
Well, there are a number. Yes, there are a number of.
That makes it a little more believable.
It does.
Yeah.
Certainly, people in this field, such as Dr. Roger Lear, who I was with in Washington at the conference, and Daryl Sims, who I've met before on a number of occasions, are doing some work in this field. Now, of course, with my skeptical hat on, I'll say that until somebody writes this up and gets it into a peer-reviewed journal such as Nature or Scientific American, the onus of proof is still on those researchers making claims in this field. But yes, if the evidence is there, it should be perfectly possible to have it validated scientifically and written into one of the major scientific journals.
Well, I also wanted to ask you, I sort of skimmed over this one question. Was there any behind-the-scenes at the Ex-Con of a next event that you're going to be a part of through collaborating with those gentlemen, or are you going to be doing something more or less on your own in the next little while?
Well, I'm involved. I don't really sit as a member on any of these groups or organisations, but certainly, I mean, the X Conference is an annual event, and it may be that I'm invited next year. It may be that I'm not. Steve Bassett, the organiser, understandably wants to mix things up a bit so that it's not always the same people on the bill. So I may be back next year, I may not. But of course, I get regularly invited to conferences, not just in America, but all around the world. I think my next trip to the US, finally, I've been invited to the Roswell conference in the first week of July. In fact, I think it's over Independence Day weekend, isn't it? So I shall be doing that. I do some consultancy work. Some of that is in the public eye. Some of it is done privately. One of the organizations that I am listed as a consultant for is the Coalition for Freedom of Information, which is put together by people such as investigative journalist Leslie Kane and filmmaker James Fox, who's of course behind the video Out of the Blue. But and that's an organization that seeks to put into the public domain a lot of first-person testimony from people with verifiable backgrounds in government, the military, and the aviation community. And of course, I mentioned earlier in our interview that the testimony from Parviz Jafari and Commandante Huertas, the Iranian and Peruvian pilots, is on the Coalition for Freedom of Information website. So I'm involved in this field, but a lot of it tends to be speaking at conferences, acting in a consultancy role, and of course contributing to a lot of TV news shows and documentaries.
Well, let me ask you, how are you received when you appear at these events? Because I know most people distrust politicians and bureaucrats. Is it looked past now that you've been on the other side of the field as well, or do people generally, have a little apprehension before they allow certain things exposed to you?
I think it's a little bit of both. I certainly experienced nothing but friendship and kindness when I was at the X Conference, and that tends to be the reaction. But I know, not least because one or two people have come up and told me, that there certainly are people at these sorts of events who regard me with a little bit of suspicion and say, well, once a G-man, always a G-man.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's good that at least, for the most part, it's a positive experience for you. And wanted to get your take on a few things. Do you know if there's an English version of the Area 51 establishment, or is that just all theoretical again?
Well, we've certainly got areas where we test fly prototype aircraft and drones, but whether we've got anywhere where we've got anything more exotic, I'm a little bit skeptical. If we have, they didn't tell me.
Right.
I was also wondering England's involvement in remote viewing. Would it be as active as the United States was before, or is it still going on?
Well, it's very interesting. You can go on to the Ministry of Defence website, which is just mod.uk, and if you search for the term remote viewing, you should actually find a fairly lengthy report, which at the time was classified secret UK eyes only, showing how shortly after 9/11, the Defence Intelligence Staff, which is part of the MOD, sponsored a study to see if they could get this to work. Now, I've spoken to some of the people who were involved in the original US remote viewing projects, and they've read the material on the Ministry of Defence website, and they, like me, were shocked and disappointed at how badly handled this study was in terms of the methodology. But I've come across that before. It's a failing of some of these highly classified studies. The concentration on secrecy tends to be something that precludes them from doing the proper consultation with the various experts. So you get this bizarre situation where they successfully manage to keep the project secret, but the only reason they're able to do that is because they don't tell anyone, and therefore they can't bring in the very experts who might, be the people who could get this to work. So it's frustrating. Now, I hasten to add, I wasn't directly involved in this study. I had one or two discussions about remote viewing when I was running the UFO project in the early 90s. But this remote viewing study took place, as I say, late 2000, early 2001.
Here's a question I don't know if you've ever been asked, but has the royal family ever shown interest in extraterrestrials? Your awareness?
Again, this is a sensitive area,
right.
And certainly if I was still at the MOD, it's not an area that I could discuss. But I think it's now a matter of almost public record that certainly, yes, some members of the royal family have expressed an interest, not just in UFOs, but also in crop circles, particularly the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. So, yes, there has been interest. Now, of course, this is sometimes slightly misunderstood because, actually, the lines between official interest and private interest can be quite blurred in a situation like this. And there's absolutely nothing to stop a member of the family taking an interest in a subject in a private capacity, just as anyone else might.
Now, you mentioned crop circles. I know you also research those. What is your take on what is making them, in your belief? How are they being designed and created? I know there's the hoaxsters that have been caught doing them, but there are some that are just unbelievable.
Well, there are, but on the other hand, some of these hoaxers work in very sophisticated teams, plan the design meticulously beforehand using computers, go out into the fields with equipment such as global positioning systems, night vision goggles, split the labour between, as I say, a fairly large group. So I'm afraid my view is that most, if not all of these things are probably made by people. Of course, I don't completely close my mind, again, to some more exotic phenomenon at work. And certainly some of the very basic circles, which of course hardly ever get reported anymore, may simply be attributable to meteorological phenomena such as wind vortices and whirlwinds and such like. And of course, the issue of climate change is quite interesting to take into account with that in mind.
And plus, if there's an electromagnetic storm of some sort, that could happen to make one as well. But also wanted to get your take on classifications of UFOs and what you think the likelihood of them being real or not real, like orbs, for one example. There's been a constant supply of orb reporting throughout the internet. What do you think they are?
Well, I think it's not disputed that balls of light, certainly. And now I differentiate between balls of light and orbs. I know it's a fairly fine distinction, but for example, even some of the people who go out and make crop circles, so you'd regard them as pretty skeptical, admit to having seen strange balls of light in the fields. Now, it may be that this is something like ball lightning, or again, some atmospheric plasma phenomenon. Again, there's a lot about meteorology and atmospheric phenomena that we're still learning. That's one possibility. What I don't tend to buy is, and you see it all the time on the internet, is when someone takes a picture, often at a UFO conference, and then says, "Look, there's an orb hovering over this speaker's head or that speaker's head." And I think those are just tricks of the light. They're some either lens flare or some fault on the film, some speck of dust, something like that.
Right.
I think so. I think that is a photographic effect, I think, and not to be confused with the balls of light that are seen in the fields, that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. And triangle UFOs, those are another heavy reported variety. Are they the Aurora Project, or is that another thing?
And just for one, I've actually seen one of them. It was a
right.
nighttime sighting, but I talked about it on one of the previous shows. It was up at my cottage. And it had like some kind of weird, maybe some kind of pulse engine, and was just emanating over the hills, and I could feel like every wave go through my body. And I swear this really happened, so I don't know.
Well, it's very interesting you say that, because I mentioned, and you'll still be able to find this, I think, on the website, and it's on YouTube as well, this recent program called Sunday Night on Channel 7 in Australia. I think you can still get it off the Channel 7 website. If not, I know it's on YouTube. They covered a British case from 1993 involving one of these black triangles, and they've got some CGI which you might find very interesting of this thing. But I remember speaking to a witness, and he said, which is why I found your remark very interesting, he said this thing made a low-frequency humming sound, he said, which he could feel as well as hear. And he said it was quite unpleasant. That was his perception.
Yeah. That's exactly what I felt. I was just hanging in there, like every wave was going through me. And
well, this is
farther away it got, it subsided, but that's 100% true. I couldn't believe it happened.
Well, this is a very famous British case that occurred in March 1993 called the Cosford Incident. Oh. Again, there's some material on my website. The Sunday Night program on Channel 7 dealt with this case as well. So you and listeners might want to check that out. But the really interesting thing, I mentioned that I was speaking to a witness, and the witness was telling me this. What I didn't mention, the witness was a serving Air Force officer with 8 years' experience who had just seen this thing go over the top of the base where he was stationed. And this was at about 2:30 in the morning. This guy was on duty. He was the Met officer.
Yeah.
And he went out. He saw this huge black triangle come slowly over the base. He saw it firing a narrow beam of light down at the ground, sweeping backwards and forwards as if it was looking for something. He heard this low-frequency sound, this humming, and then he said from a very slow speed, it suddenly shot away to the horizon at incredible speed. He said many times faster than a military jet. And of course, this is an Air Force officer with 8 years' experience in the service talking to me about this. So, very interesting case.
I'm so glad I brought that up. I feel like I'm not alone, at least, you know.
Well, no, and of course,
great.
Two other very famous waves of sightings involve these triangular-shaped craft: the Hudson Valley sightings from the 1980s, and sightings over Belgium in 1990. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so no, I was just going to say that, of course, triangular-shaped UFOs are certainly amongst the most interesting, and of course one can have a debate about whether something like the Phoenix Lights was a triangular or a delta-shaped craft, or whether it was different lights. I think the jury's still out on that. Stevensville as well, other reports of massive UFOs, some people seeing triangles. So yeah, that's it's a very interesting part of the phenomenon, these black triangles.
Well, this would lead me into a next question I want to ask you then. I was checking out your website, and under the photo section, I noticed the officers that witnessed the Rendlesham craft, whatever. I think you have a photo of like kind of like a hieroglyphic type drawing that was on the craft's hull.
Yes.
Yeah, well, the thing that struck me as amazing is on that hieroglyphic, there's something, me and Jay, that you're talking to right now, we had an experience that when we were teenagers, something made us all look up at the sky, and when we looked up, there was like pretty much your typical saucer, and in the one thing I noticed was really up high, there was a black triangle at the bottom of the craft. So when I looked at the drawings that those soldiers made, there's a picture of a circle with a black triangle in the middle.
Yes.
So that is really standing out to me, and I've also read a book from back in the 50s or 60s, and I know there's no Photoshop back then. These crafts were quite prevalent back then. So I'm just fascinated about this whole triangle thing.
Yes, it is
interesting.
interesting.
The Egyptians, like there's so many avenues we can go with this. But we witnessed that, and now that I see their story and it has that picture, it's unbelievable.
Well, yeah, the sketch that you're looking
confirms
at.
it for me, basically, now that I've seen that drawing there. And
right.
In the bottom of a craft, I'm like, that 100%, that must be real.
Well, that.
Sorry, for me, that is, though. I don't know.
No, it's always interesting to get this sort of corroboration, this confirmation from an independent source.
You've probably seen pictures of these crafts, too, I'm talking about, with the black triangle at the bottom. If you look into the older pictures and stuff, you'll come across it, So I don't know.
Yeah, that sketch that you've described was something that Jim Peniston, who was a United States Air Force officer based at the twin bases of Bentwaters and Woodbridge, of course, he sketched that. That it's taken from an original sketch in his police notebook that he filmed when he was right up close and personal with this thing. I mean, Jim's testimony is that he got so close to this thing that he could touch the side of it.
Whoa.
Well, I wanted to ask your opinion on, do you think there might be a high level of sightings in the UK due to the fact that you're right over the prime meridian? Could it be a gateway, would you say, maybe they're interdimensional crafts, possibly?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. And I mean, of course, one could say that I think that, you know, all these longitude and latitude things are artificial constructs anyway. Well, except for, you know, the sort of natural boundaries such as the equator and things which have some geometrical logic to them. But I mean, we put that through Greenwich, of course, in London, just because we were the ones making the rules, I guess. But there are theories that these things. Some people believe that we're dealing with extraterrestrial spacecraft, but some people think it's interdimensional. Some people think that maybe even ideas of time travelers from the future. I suppose there are many, many different theories about UFOs, and it's quite possible that there's no one neat solution to this mystery, and there's no one single answer. Again, I don't know. But I think, I mean,
for thousands of years as well.
But pardon me?
The UFO presence could have been here thousands of years ago as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Over us, you know.
One can look at medieval paintings,
Oh, yeah.
Renaissance paintings, and some people spot things that they say are UFOs. Some people, and of course, Graham Hancock was another speaker at the X conference last weekend. Graham and others before him have pointed to some cave paintings and suggested even that in prehistory that our ancestors were seeing these things. There are references in the Bible to things that many people believe are UFOs, and of course the phrase, yes, absolutely, the Book of Ezekiel, and indeed the phrase chariots of fire comes from the Bible.
Eric von Daniken, a lot of his work and stuff. That always
Indeed.
Growing up, yeah.
Yeah, and there are also those that also believe that we were somehow genetically enhanced by these visitors as well, to speed up the evolutionary process.
Indeed, and there's an interesting passage in Genesis, which again people often cite, and I'm afraid I've forgotten it now, but it's the ones about the Elohim coming down and laying with the daughters of men, which many people, particularly those who are interested in the modern alien abduction phenomenon, people draw parallels between that passage from Genesis and the idea of some sort of hybridization program. And of course, again, if you look at folklore and the work done, for example, by Jacques Vallée to draw parallels between folklore and modern UFO and abduction accounts, the idea of the fairy folk taking people, particularly babies, sometimes swapping them with a changeling. These ideas of fairy kidnaps and changelings are not a million miles away from modern accounts of alien abduction. And of course, as I said earlier in our interview, these are just labels, and we love putting labels on things.
It's easier to understand when you label it, that's for sure. I wanted to also find out, what do you think the reason for Stonehenge, in your opinion, why was it constructed? Was it just a Druid religious site, or was it something that they made possibly to attract visitors themselves?
I don't know, and scholars can't agree on it. Because of the alignment, it does seem clear that it was aligned deliberately to mark the big solstices, the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the equinox. So it was certainly something that could have been used as a calendar, as it were, because the sun on the summer solstice rises between certain stones. So it could be used in that sense. What wider significance it had as a site of worship, a site of sacrifice, a site of who knows what, we simply don't know. I mean, it's clear that huge numbers of people came there, so it was clearly a very, very important site. And of course, because of the distances that the stones had to be transported, I mean, we know that it was a very, very important site. A lot of resources in terms of manpower and effort went into planning and constructing this. But as I say, the true purpose of the site may sadly be lost forever in history.
Right. Well, I know you mentioned that you will be appearing at the Roswell conference. We spoke to Stanton Friedman and got his belief on the crash. How do you feel about it? Do you think it really occurred, or is it something that we'll just never know?
I think it's indisputable that something crashed, and of course it was the U.S. military themselves who actually said in their initial press release that we have recovered one of these flying discs that has been puzzling America for the last few weeks. So it's difficult to imagine that they would have made so public an announcement if this had simply been a weather balloon. Even a highly classified weather balloon carrying Project Mogul, as many people now believe, it does seem odd. I mean, of course, this was, as I'm sure Stan will have pointed out, this was probably the most elite military unit anywhere in the world. These people were the best of the best. The 509th Bomb Group was the only atomic bomb-capable squadron anywhere in the world in 1947. So, yeah, something crashed, but I think, as you suggested in your question, yeah, it may well be that we never know the answer to that until and unless some new piece of evidence comes to light. Now, whether that's deathbed testimony, and of course, researchers such as Don Schmidt have done a lot of work in this field recently, whether it's deathbed testimony or whether it's, somewhere, because of course it must exist somewhere, the wreckage itself. But until something more tangible comes out, we're not going to resolve this, and of course as time goes by, this thing begins to slip from history into legend.
Well, let me ask you too, do you do any paranormal research outside of ufology for your own personal interests, say something such as Atlantis or near-death experiences, or are you strictly just focusing on what you get in front of you, more or less, like ufology-wise?
Well, obviously UFOs and abductions and crop circles, I think those latter two phenomena, because of the perceived link with UFOs, those are my areas of specialism. However, I now I've left the MOD. I do a lot of I work as a freelance journalist myself. I do a lot of television work, consulting, contributing, presenting, and on that I've certainly gotten into the paranormal more generally. I've commentated in the media about remote viewing, about subjects like the Bermuda Triangle. More generally, I've commented on the psychology of belief, on conspiracy theories, and of course, because I've served for 21 years in the MOD, I also comment in the media sometimes on defense issues.
Well, let me ask you, too, I think this would be a really important question. How many decades, because I know we're not ready just yet, would you feel would be the right time for absolute full disclosure?
Well, again, I guess it it prejudges the question, what is there to disclose? But, I mean, I'm not one of these people who believe that if tomorrow there was to be some official announcement that extraterrestrial life has been discovered, I don't think that, the world would end. One hears all these cliches such as undermining world religion, stock market crash. Well, I think that's happening anyway.
Exactly.
John Alexander, whose background is U.S. Army, made a very interesting point about this very issue, and he sort of posed this question of disclosure, and then he said, does this mean I don't have to go to work anymore? And of course his point was, no, it certainly doesn't mean that. People will still have to go to school, go to work, put food on the table, get their kids educated, all the normal business will have to go on. Our worldview would undoubtedly change, possibly for the better. Some people have pointed out that if we discover that we're not the only ones, we might be less likely to regard ourselves as American, Russian, British, Iranian, Chinese, and more inclined to view ourselves as citizens of planet Earth. The same with religion. And of course it's very interesting. Recently we've seen, particularly from the Catholic Church, some very interesting statements about how the discovery of extraterrestrial life would not be incompatible with church doctrine, and in their view would only enhance the glory of God's creation. So I think, that was an interesting point. Do the Catholic Church know something? No, probably not. Are they covering their bets? Very probably.
Well, let me ask. I believe there's a flow of desensitization, kind of, even in the movies we see and stuff. It's always been a theory of mine.
Well, I'm not that convinced by that, because you see, well, it just seems to me that if that is the case, we're getting very mixed messages. Because
I know some are horror movies, some are violent. I know what
exactly.
Yeah.
If we were being acclimatized, one would expect one key message. But 1 year we have Independence Day and War of the Worlds. Then next we have something like Close Encounters or E.T. Right. So it doesn't strike me as true. But I know that there are a lot of people who do think that Hollywood and the media in the wider sense do have a role to play here.
Well, let me ask you, how would it change you if it did turn out to be 100% true? Like, say, for example, a landing. How would it change you and your views?
Well, I'm not sure it would change my views, but I think, like most people, I would just be incredibly interested. I would want to know, just out of intellectual curiosity, everything about them. I'd want to know some very practical things that we could use, such as what's the secret of interstellar travel? Do they have anything they can teach us about generating power? Do they have anything that they could offer in by way of help against things like diseases, pollution, climate change, those sorts of issues? But having said that, I think there's a danger if we do make contact. We do. The moment we get all the answers on a plate and are just spoon-fed everything, maybe we have to make our own mistakes and struggle and get through these things.
Look at these ancient civilizations or even isolated societies still present to this day. Once they get contaminated, that's it. They lose everything.
Absolutely,
energy,
and
culture.
They lose. I mean, in a practical sense, of course, often because of the abuse of power or the deliberate or accidental contamination from disease, they lose their lives. But certainly they lose their cultural integrity. And I think there would be a danger of our losing our cultural integrity. That said, of course, a lot of people believe that what is more likely than landing on the White House lawn is simply that radio astronomers will detect a signal and will pick up proof that other civilizations exist. And it's very interesting with that in mind that, of course, the largest radio telescope ever to be constructed, the Square Kilometre Array, will be constructed over the next few years. And this is going to be a massive engineering project. And the power of this radio telescope is going to be orders of magnitude above and beyond anything we've currently got, including the big systems like the Very Large Array. So there are many radio astronomers who believe that if those civilizations are out there, within the next 10, 15, maybe 20 years, we'll find them.
That's absolutely outstanding, and that's probably the best way, as you said, because it's practical science involved as well. I just wanted to let everyone know that we're down to our last minute here for our show, and I can't say it enough. I really appreciate and thank you, sir, for being part of Paranormal Guys Radio.
Yeah,
and I just wanted to ask you, did you want to mention any projects or websites as you did earlier? But I can put them in the chat room and people can check them out immediately. I already placed your personal website, but is there any books or that you may recommend for people to get to know you even more?
Well, I think nickpope.net is a good start point, and that's got details of my books, but I would also recommend, as I mentioned earlier, the Coalition for Freedom of Information website, and I can't recall the URL, but Google the term and it will come up top.
Okay, and do you have any upcoming projects like television specials or movies that we should be looking out for?
There are various things in the pipeline, but to be honest, sometimes I lose track of them. I do quite a lot, so keep an eye out. That's all I'd say.
Well, again, I can't thank you enough, and I hope you have a fantastic Saturday. And if you ever feel that you want to speak further to us, I am definitely up for a second show, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and all the best to you and all the listeners.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.